Say it with me.
Wab.
When I was growing up in Oshki-Pimache-O-Win in Treaty 3, everybody used to call me by my full name, Obanakut, right? But as soon as I moved to Winnipeg and started playing hockey, it got shortened real fast to Wab. You know, nobody wanted to be like, hey, pass it over here. So a lot of people wonder, like, even on the ride in, Cynthia, one of the great organizers, was asking me, so what does that mean? What is that name all about? And as you can imagine, like going to school in the city and going to work overseas and in the US, people are always like, huh? What? Wab? Wab? Do you mean to say Bob? No, it's Wab. So now you guys know, Wabanakut in the it means white cloud in Ojibwe. I come from a very beautiful community in Treaty 3 called Raven's Nest Portage, Kakagiwakasuniwani. And on the Indian Affairs website, it's called the Ojibways of Oshki-Pimache First Nation. And it's a very wonderful place to grow up. I know when you watch the news and you see our communities depicted on television, there's like a very kind of standard way that they show our communities, right? It's like, okay, the news story starts with like a gravel road and a couple of kids walking by with dirty clothes on. And then there's a picture of a dog barking at the camera, right? Standard res imagery. And like part of that stuff, I guess you could see in Oshki-Pimache when I was growing up, but it was also a beautiful, beautiful place to live, you know? As kids, we'd ride our bikes down to the lake every day and go swimming, ride our bikes over to the baseball diamond, play baseball, then go fishing in the evening. It was an amazing, ideal place to be a young boy. But how many of you have seen a community portrayed like that in the media? One of our communities, like a positive portrayal. It's few and far between, right? And so that's why one of the big priorities of my career has been working in the media, first with CBC television here in Canada, and then internationally with Al Jazeera America, is to set the record straight about Anishinawbe people and Indigenous people in general. Because I know that we are very fun-loving, humorous, celebratory people who have a wealth of talent and knowledge to share with the world. And I find that, you know, now is a time that we need to move beyond the old stereotypes and the old discussions of the past and really step up and be what our ancestors wanted for us. And so that's what I really wanted to talk to you all about today, is to celebrate that spirit that is still alive within our peoples, and to encourage all of you who are in post-secondary to get your education, to engage in a process of lifelong learning. You know, get your certificate, get your degree, but then keep going after that. Get a professional degree, a law degree, a medical degree, an accounting designation. One of the frustrating things for me is working internationally, you know, going down to Silicon Valley and seeing like the people who work at Google and things like that, and gaining an appreciation for how rich and how beautiful the world is today. But then sometimes I go back and talk to my own relatives, you know, and they're saying like, well, I'm not sure if I should go to high school or not. But it's like, no, yes, you absolutely have to go to high school. Then you have to go to university. Then you have to get a professional designation after that. And then after that, then you got to find a career that's going to make you happy, healthy, and successful. Often, you know, people talk about the sleeping giant that's in the water here. But like as Anishinawbe people, we know the story behind that, right? It's Maadaadizi, right? Maadaadizi are a great folk hero. And for those who don't know, like, who Maadaadizi is, it's like, imagine a native Jesus who was like not afraid to make a fool out of himself a lot. That gives you an idea of roughly what Maadaadizi is. And so our great folk hero, you know, apparently long ago, during the coming of the Europeans, he laid down here, and he's been resting ever since. And I often ask myself, what would happen if he woke up today? What would he think if he looked around at his lands, at his people? What if he looked across his lands and he saw the tailings ponds, the highways going through the sacred sites, chemicals in the water, the Great Lakes? What would he think if he saw his great-great-grandchildren killing themselves, medicating themselves with prescription drugs? What would he see if he saw that his people were the poorest of the poor in their own land? The young Anishinawbe kids go to schools on reserve that get $4,000 less per student per year compared to provincial schools. What would Maadaadizi think if he saw that there were more kids in the child welfare system today than were ever in the residential school system? What would he think if he saw that there were 1,200 missing and murdered Indigenous women in this country since 1980? 1,200 stolen sisters, aunties, grandmas, nieces, daughters. Would he wake up? Or maybe that's why he's still sleeping. So I think of stuff like that, and it's kind of a challenge. How are we going to get beyond that? How are we going to rise up and be the proud nations that we know we can be? Then I think about those who came before us, not as long ago as Maadaadizi, but more recently. You know, the song that I did there at the opening, I'm talking about heroes from the recent past. Chiefs like Peguis, war heroes like Tommy Prince, former National Chief Phil Fontaine, Olympian Monique Horn-Miller, people like that. I think about the sacrifices that they made to be where we are here today. And it inspires me to think of our elders. When we think a generation ago, what was the role of education to my father and his generation? What was the role of education to my grandma, to my grandpa? To them, education was the residential school era, the residential school system. And in the case of my late father, he literally had to fight. He literally had to fight to hang on to his language and culture. It was the same experience for my aunties and uncles. They literally had to fight against adults in some cases. They had to endure many hardships. But for me, what they did was so important so that I can stand before you here today speaking Anishinawbe, that we can gather here together to celebrate our culture together and stand here as living proof that those who designed the residential school system failed. That those who designed the Indian Act failed in their mission to try and destroy our peoples, our languages, and our ways of life. And to me, that's a very powerful thing. That these little children were more powerful than the entire Canadian state, the entire government of Canada, and 5 churches levying their resources against them. It's a remarkable thing to think of what those young children did. And so when I ask myself, what can I do today? I immediately am forced to consider, well, did my old man ever give up when he couldn't see his mom and dad as a boy? Did my auntie give up when she was being punished for speaking her language? Did my uncles ever give up when I tried to run away from home and they were dragged back to that school. No, they did not give up. So who am I to throw away that legacy? Who am I to turn my back on the sacrifice that they made so that I could be here today? So where is our people today? Where are our people today? Well, I'll give you a snapshot of my family. My younger sister, Shawan, is also from Anishinawbe. Right now, she's finishing her PhD at Harvard University. Harvard University is ranked #1 in global surveys of the world's post-secondary institutions, right? And you know how much money the federal government has paid for education to date? Nothing. And it's not because programs like the post-secondary student support program don't exist. Absolutely they do. But the reason the federal government hasn't paid any money towards her post-secondary education is because she's there on a full academic scholarship. When she finished her undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto, she had Columbia University and Harvard University, 2 Ivy League institutions, in a bidding war to have her attend their graduate schools. Right? So it's fair to say that my little sister is the brightest in her field at her age in the entire world. And she is an Anishinawbe. She came from a community just like yours. And she encountered the same things that you did growing up in this part of the world. So I raise her up as an example, as a role model, and I celebrate her. And I often do that when I'm visiting communities. You know, like use her as this example and challenge young people. She did it, why can't you? There's one time some kid said to me, well, why didn't you? So I say, good point. Let's move on. So that's my younger sister. My older sister, Diane, she's a lawyer. She's a former Grand Chief of Treaty 3. My wife is a medical doctor. Her mom is a master's in education. Her stepdad is a professional engineer. Myself, I'm university educated. I'm a senior executive at a Maadaadizi University. So you look at our family, right? PhDs, doctors, lawyers, engineers, master's degrees. You don't see that portrayed in the media. You don't see that on Arctic Air. You don't see that on North of 60. And yet that's increasingly the reality in First Nations, Métis, and Inuit families today. My family, we're not the only family like that. And so the role of education in our communities has changed. In one generation, education has gone from being the tool of oppression that was used to hold us down to becoming the tool of empowerment that we are using to lift ourselves up. And that's a remarkable thing. And all those students who stood up here just a few moments ago, you are part of that resurgence. You are part of that renaissance, that rebuilding of our nations, of us appropriating the tools of today to give back to our communities and strengthen them for tomorrow. And so we have a ways to go yet. If you've been paying attention to the First Nations Education Act controversy, you know that some of the issues are contentious. And regardless of how you feel about how that controversy played out, the mere fact that our First Nations leaders have to even ask for equal funding for kids on reserve tells you something about this country that is an uncomfortable truth, which is to say that in 2014, First Nations people still need to negotiate for equality. Is that consistent with your vision of Canada? Is that consistent with the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms? That merely because of where you are born, you may have a longer path on the road to success? I don't think so. I don't think that's consistent with anyone's vision of Canada. So I know that we can change it. And the way forward for me is to reach out beyond our communities. As I travel around this country, I see that there are more non-Native people than ever who want to do right by First Nations people, want to do right by Métis people. And so I think we can work together with them. Often you hear talk like, oh, we need to bring the government to its knees. Well, the real way to bring a government to its knees is to get the majority of the voting public on side. And I think that we can do that. If we look across the various issues with which we are engaged in, whether it's education, child welfare, natural resources, addressing historic wrongs, the missing and murdered women, First Nations people are in the right on almost every one of those issues. We occupy the moral high ground on every one of those issues. And yet, why is it that we can't communicate that reality to the rest of the country? Well, part of it is that it takes time. It takes time for us to get educated. It takes time for us to develop experience, to step up into those roles and to communicate this reality and to win the support that we need to bring about that change that we need. But I'm confident that I see it happening. And I'm really excited by that. I think that in our lifetime, we will see the transformation that we want. We will see all children in this country, especially First Nations children in this country, free to be everything that they want to be. I also know that we're probably, in our lifetime, we'll also see the first First Nations Prime Minister of this country. She may have just declared her candidacy for one of the parties. We'll see. But when we start thinking about the future, to me, that's where things get really interesting and really exciting. Because everything I'm talking about so far, it's about social justice, right? It's about equality. It's about making kids have a fair shot. And that's really important. That's super important. Absolutely it is. But I'm not satisfied with that. I don't want equality. I don't want what everyone else has. I don't want an equal stake. The real vision that I have for Indigenous people and for Indigenous communities and Indigenous nations is the same vision that I believe that our ancestors had. And that is for us to stand up and be global leaders. Leaders showing the way to a more sustainable society and a more meaningful way of life. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Right now, there are certain great issues of our time. Income inequality is one of them. Right now in the United States of America, there's an ever-growing movement towards trying to make sure that the richest in the society allow the poorest to share more equally in the spoils of success. It's not my cell phone, by the way, so don't get the wrong idea. The other great issue of our time is the environment, right? Tailings ponds are bursting open in the West. Rising floodwaters everywhere. Hydraulic fracturing has created earthquakes in places like Oklahoma where there never were earthquakes before. And if you talk to social scientists and researchers, they'll tell you that we're living in a different age today. If you go back in the time, there's different markers for the historic eras that you're in, like the Pleistocene era, right? Like when there's dinosaurs, or the Mesocene era, right? Well, they say that today we are living in the Anthropocene, which means that human beings ourselves, we are the dominant, not just social and political and economic force on the planet, but also a geologic force, a force that is changing things all around us, in some cases for better, but in some cases for worse. And so we need to come to terms with our environmental impact, while at the same time recognizing the fact that, hey, I like having an iPhone, right? The minerals for that iPhone come out of the earth. I like driving a truck. That means that I am a consumer who's demanding the products created by pipelines, right? And all of us, whether we drive a truck or not, are dependent on carbon-based economies. So we need to find a balance. What is the way forward there? I'll tell you a few examples. I work at the University of Winnipeg, the executive there. And over the past few years, we've started up a few programs that really excite me. One of them is Anishinawbe Monotawata Niga Benonchiyak. Let's speak Ojibwe to our kids. It's a free after-school community learning program to teach kids Ojibwe or Cree language. It's their choice. And we do a lot of the activities that you would expect. Games, songs, arts, crafts, and things like that. But we also incorporate science, technology, engineering concepts, and mathematics into those teachings as well. And so, for instance, one day we made rockets, right? And the young people really enjoyed it because the rocket is fueled by Diet Coke and Mentos, right? You put those together in a container and it explodes, and then the rocket gets launched into the sky. But while we're talking about that, we're also able to teach them about the night sky, the Anishinawbe cosmology. Because you go study astronomy at university, most likely they're going to teach you the constellations which derive from a Greek or Roman history and Greek or Roman culture, right? But our peoples, we have our own cosmology, our own way of looking at the night sky. And so we're able to teach that to young people. Here's one constellation, Benassi. Here's another one, Maadaadizi. Here's another one, Nagekana. Beautiful things. And then when we get to describing the chemical reaction that creates the carbon dioxide, we're able to teach them that term in Anishinaabe as well. Kaamboyagamasek. Kaamboyagamasek. Creating bubbles. It's chemical reaction. And so sometimes it's surprising to people, right? They're like, wait a minute, you have a word in Ojibwe for chemical reaction, for astronomy, for math? And it's like, yes, absolutely we do. You know? There's a lie that's been told about many of our peoples, right? And it's that we did not have civilization prior to the coming of European peoples. But that is a lie. The most challenging part of that lie is that many of our own peoples have started to believe it too, right? So we're able to turn back that towards the truth and remind people that yes, our ancestors had a rich intellectual life. Our ancestors were smart, were curious, were engaged with sciences and maths. And if you're a young person who is fascinated by math, is fascinated by science, then you should feel free to pursue that and to celebrate that. Another program that we've been able to launch is called Young Entrepreneurs. And what it is a training program for high school students that shows them how to develop a business plan out of their ideas, and then they pitch it to investors, sort of like a Dragon's Den kind of thing. At the same time, we introduce them to the traditional culture. So we take them to sweats. They do teachings with spiritual leaders. They do giveaways. They learn about all those things. And then they bring back what they've learned about the Anishinaabe culture and the Dakota culture and the Cree culture into the business context. So for instance, they learn about offerings. If you're going to take something from the forest, you should leave an offering. If you're going to take an animal, there's a certain way that you should prepare the body. If you're going to cut down a tree, you're supposed to put down tobacco. If you're going to take a rock, put down tobacco. Then they bring that into the business context and ask themselves, all right, so what would happen to a timber operation if they had to put down tobacco for each tree that they cut? What would happen to a diamond mine if they had to leave an offering for each rock that they took out of the earth? And that's kind of like an interesting, oh, hey, yeah, that's kind of a pie in the sky idea. But it's actually a very contemporary management philosophy, right? It's called triple bottom line accounting. That you should pay attention not just to your financial bottom line, but you should also pay attention to the environmental and the social impact that your business is having, right? It's also similar to what politicians talk about when they talk about a carbon tax, right? The idea that you need to internalize the costs that big polluters are making. The fact that you need to make a pipeline company or an oil company or a gas company bear some of the burden of what they're doing to the environment, right? And when you talk to economists, they use language like internalizing externalities. Because right now, in our current economic model, the environment is external to a corporation's activities. But if you follow the Anishinawbe paradigm, the Anishinawbe worldview, you could never have such a thing as an externality, right? How can you view the earth as external if the earth is your mother? It's not possible. Similarly, our cultures teach humility. Our cultures teach that when a hunter is successful, they should cut up the moose and give some of it to the elders in their community. They should give some of the moose to the less fortunate. That when they pull in a net full of fish, they should give some of those fish to a family and to the children that may be hungry. How is it possible to have income inequality in a society that demands that its most successful cut up the moose and share it with the less fortunate? Over the years, I've spent many summers sundancing in South Dakota, and it's a beautiful way of life. And one of the most beautiful things that I've heard down at the Sundance is the following. As I was growing up there, they used to tell me this: the chief should be the poorest person in the community. The chief should be the poorest person in the community. And they're not making a political statement by saying that. What they're saying is they're giving a teaching. And they're saying that in the traditional village, in the traditional society, the leader would always put the well-being of those around him before his own. That she would always put the well-being of her people before her own. So as long as there is somebody hungry in the community, if you want to be a leader, you should be giving them your food. As long as somebody doesn't have a roof over their heads, you should be giving them your TV, your wigwam. As long as somebody is hurting, you should be using your pipe, your drum, your sweat lodge to help them and to heal them. And that's the type of leadership that I really admire. But again, if income inequality is a great issue of our time, ask yourselves, is income inequality possible in a society where it says that the leader should be the poorest person in the community? Right? So I know that our culture, that our elders, that our teachings and traditions have something very powerful, very positive to contribute to the world. Right? We can lead the way forward on the environment, on respecting the earth, on how you can make a living while still making sure that you don't take everything out of the forest. I know that we can lead the way forward on income inequality, that we can show how it is possible to be a leader, to be successful, without impoverishing everybody in the community around you. And that's what I'm really excited by and really moved by. And that's what I hope that everybody here sees in themselves and for themselves is not just a job, not just a career, but for all of us to help fulfill that vision of our ancestors, for our nations to be leaders with our partners in the treaties. And so for us to fulfill that vision, we each need to pursue our own individual dreams. And by each of us pursuing those individual dreams, it will add up to something great and something substantial. And so that means getting educated. It means finding a career. But it also means giving back. It also means volunteering. And it also means being active in the community around yourself. So all these things that I'm talking about, it may seem a little far off or a little far-fetched, but I saw a powerful example of how we are on the verge of tremendous change just a few weeks ago in Winnipeg. Sadly, many of you will know that we lost one of our young sisters in Winnipeg about 3 weeks ago. Her name is Tina Fontaine, 15-year-old young Anishinawbe who was murdered. She turned up in the river on the same day that we lost one of our brothers, Farron Hall, who is known to many in the city as the homeless hero, because he rescued drowning people in the river not once, but twice. So it's a very sad day. And the community was very upset. And talking to people, I knew there was more than just Anishinaabe people who were upset and who were hurt by Tina Fontaine's death. I talked to many non-Native people as well who were offended and who objected to seeing a young child treated in this way, treated so inhumanely. And so we formed a group very quickly, myself and my friend Negon Sinclair from the University of Manitoba, group of women, including Leah Gazan of the U of W, and Althea Gibash, who's known as the Bannock Lady in Winnipeg because she feeds homeless people every Sunday in the inner city. And we put out the call to our allies outside of the Native community as well. And I'm proud to say that even though it was in a dark circumstance and in response to a tragic event, that call was heeded and that the people of Winnipeg rallied together. We held a memorial at the site near the river where we smoked our pipes with the families. And then we marched. More than 2,000 people marched together down Main Street, closing Portage and Main, and onto the Forks. And yes, there was a strong Anishinaabe presence, but there was also many people from other walks of life, the descendants of Europeans, Arabic people, people from Africa, South Asians, and their descendants. And it was a beautiful, remarkable thing. Yes, 1,182 missing and murdered Indigenous women. The media didn't pay attention. But somehow, when it came to the 1,183rd, Tina Fontaine, it struck a nerve, it struck a chord, and the community responded. And once the community rose up in that way together, all of a sudden, the Globe and Mail, the National Post, CBC News, CTV National are all covering the story, right? And so it's a breakthrough. It's remarkable. That's what I'm talking about. Our people rising up to claim our rightful role in the society, but also working together with our allies outside of our own community who understand that now is a time for justice, and now is a time for change to come. So it was a very positive moment for me to witness that in my city. But the best part for me happened later that night on the drive home. I'm driving home in my truck with my son, who's 9 years old. His Anishinaabe name is Oshki-Pimache-O-Win. And he turned to me and he said, Dad, that's the first time that I've ever seen Anishinaabe people leading this city. I was like, damn, this little kid's got it figured out. And he said, and that's the way it should be. Because we're first. We're the First Nations. I was like, damn, this kid's 9 years old and he's more eloquent than I am. And then he started asking me, has there ever been an Anishinaabe mayor? Has there ever been an Anishinaabe president? He asked. And we started talking about it. But that is the change that we are on the verge of. Not just a conversation about social justice, not just a conversation about righting the wrongs of the past. For many young people today, they don't see First Nations people as less than. What they see when they see First Nations people is Stanley Cup winners like Jordan Rowland, judo winners like A Tribe Called Red, intellectuals, writers like Joseph Boyden. For the younger generation of Canadians today, they don't know anything other than seeing Indigenous achievers. So let us work hard and celebrate that and make sure that we continue on that path together. And so I celebrate you all today. I raise you up, I lift you up, and I hold you high in my heart and in my mind. And I say, Kimiwach Chui and Yunin, and Miwach Kapizinda Yank Menoa. Or as we say in English, thanks for listening to me.